What are the four biggest questions facing the teams from the AFC South, from Houston to Tennessee? What are the priorities teams have to think about there in that division in terms of offensive skill and supporting cast? It's time to break it down for you right here and right now as we continue our offseason outlook series here on Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. Come to the site now, check out all the fallout from the Russell Wilson trade there from the Seahawks to the Broncos, Aaron Rodgers returning to the Packers. I also did a whole show on the Russell Wilson reaction there, the takeaways from a fantasy football perspective. Check it out. We posted yesterday after the trade there. So looking at what Wilson's value is now in Denver, what happens to the Broncos receivers, and what happens to the Seahawks receivers and that quarterback situation there under Pete Carroll. So check that show out. Today we're going to focus on the AFC South, some big offseason questions, including quarterback in this division. So we'll start in alphabetical order with the Houston Texans, get around to the Tennessee Titans, the reigning division champions here, and look at what's going on with Ryan Tannehill and company. We know we have a couple new coaches breaking in. One and done for David Culley and Urban Meyer. They're replaced by Lovie Smith and Doug Peterson. So we'll get into that, what these teams are thinking. A lot of question marks, multiple for most of these teams, except for maybe the Titans. So we'll get into that on this show. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are free and available for you on all platforms. Now let's consider what's going on with the Houston Texans. So they go defensive-minded. They promote their defense coordinator, Lovie Smith. A little bit of surprise for everyone, but it's a tough situation there with that Patriots brain trust coming over, Nick Caserio, Jack Easterby. What are they doing here? Unknown situation with Deshaun Watson. We're waiting on that situation here with Deshaun. Is he going to be their quarterback? Is he going to be cleared and good to go here in 2022? Or will there be some legal action, which we have to wait for? We don't want to rush it. It is a complicated matter. Texans seem to be getting impatient here, but I don't know why they should be. They've seen Deshaun Watson miss an entire year. So the biggest question there for the Texans really is to decide, is Davis Mills the answer? He has a strong arm. He showed some flashes last year. We know Tyrod Taylor is not going to return here. He's a free agent. He's a bridge. He bounces around. He's the younger version of Ryan Fitzpatrick at this point. They've even had a similar team in the Bills, but so I think Davis Mills could be the guy for sure. And you look at number 3 overall, that's a question mark. Do they move on from Laramie Tunsil, left tackle? Do they focus that pick on the offensive line? Do they go best defensive player available? Whether it's Aiden Hutchinson, Kayvon Thibodeau, maybe a Kyle Hamilton there of Notre Dame. So a lot of things the Texans need to think about here this offseason. How active are they going to be in free agency to try to improve their team? What do they do at running back? David Johnson is a free agent. They moved on from Philip Lindsay last year and Mark Ingram. So both of those guys are not there. Rex Burkhead cannot be your best running back solution going into a season. So Davis Mills, Rex Burkhead, and Brandon Cooks, they need some help here. Nico Collins, it's a pretty good receiver here, but I think he could do a lot more to help their team if they could get some supporting cast in there. Do they go at tight end? All kinds of question marks with Texans. We don't want them to be a team to avoid in fantasy football, but other than Cooks last year, that was definitely the case for the most part with Houston, except when Rex Burkhead got hot down the stretch, or you used one of their backs at some point if you were desperate. So, again, Texans have to answer a lot of things. They got some draft picks. Very quiet team so far this offseason. We're still waiting. Deshaun Watson, again, let's let the process go through here, because if any of these allegations are true, they got to move on and take care of that in the right way here, because that's the most important thing. Then if he's cleared, then we'll see what happens if he comes into play as the potential Texans returning starter. Maybe Lovie Smith and that presence helps, and maybe not having the Dolphins as a potential destination with Brian Flores. Does he end up with the Steelers? Because we know Brian Flores has the connection now with Mike Tomlin working as a defensive assistant. Maybe he'll lobby for Watson there if everything is cleared with Watson, and he can vouch for him there with Tomlin. So a lot of things yet to be determined here with the Texans, but it could be just pretty messy here for them overall this offseason. My guess is they'll stick with Mills, but they'll get in a veteran bridge to compete. So not all that appealing. Keep in mind, this draft class for quarterbacks isn't that great. So really jumping on one at 3 overall, even if it's Malik Willis, seems like a bit of a stretch here. For the Texans, when they got so many holes to fill, they can just get the best player available basically in every round and be helping their team. We'll see what they do at running back. We'll have some interest there. It's, again, the starting running back in the NFL. You can't ignore, especially if they draft a guy like Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall, and if they put him into the role here. But really, the Texans have a lot of explaining and answering to do here this offseason to trust them in reality and fantasy football for a while now here in 2022. All right, there's a look at the Texans. That's all we can say about them, really. Just a lot of question marks and a lot of things that we need to sort out. But, yeah, very quiet team so far, even on the Watson front here in 2022. We'll talk about the Indianapolis Colts and Jacksonville Jaguars, the I's and J's after our H, and then go to our T, Tennessee Titans in our final segment. It's that time of the year where I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but I'm sticking to my resolutions this year to eat right because of Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution because I enjoy eating them. Maybe try the Puffs. If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite with some incredible flavors: yummy cinnamon churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. So good. These are going to be your new favorites here. All Built Bars that you get are covered in 100% real chocolate. That includes the Puffs. They are also covered in 100% real chocolate, low-calorie, high-protein. Replace your candy bars with these. They're better than anything you can get, a Milky Way or those type of bars. Built Bar is going to be better for you and tasting delicious here. And you don't have to get 200 to 300 calories. Most Built Bars contain only 130 calories, 4 grams sugar, 4 grams net carbs. Get this packed with 17 grams of protein. So excellent bar to get you on the go. Good snack. It's going to be healthy and power you through and really keep your cravings at bay because Built Bar is a treat in itself. Mint brownie, coconut almond. These are some of the new flavors that they have at Built Bar. They're coming up with new ones all the time, including for their puffs. So check it out at built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off your order. Use the promo code LOCK15 for 15% off only at built.com. All right, it is time to continue the show here, and we'll get into the Indianapolis Colts. We know what big question is lingering for them on top of other things. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Make sure you're following Locked On NFL, Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast, just like this show. All right, let's continue here looking at the AFC South, the biggest question marks. We know what the biggest question mark with the Indianapolis Colts is. Is Carson Wentz going to be the starting quarterback? They've been very lukewarm, both the general manager, Chris Ballard, and the coach, Frank Reich, about Carson Wentz. He had a really awful final stretch. He was pretty decent and efficient. He helped them win some games. Remember that 49ers game? He didn't throw a lot, but he played off Jonathan Taylor, and they won. So he was rather efficient getting the ball downfield. Remember the Jets game as well, Thursday nighter. But really, at the end is what left the bad taste in their mouth. At least they were able to make the playoffs with Phillip Rivers acting as a bridge, replacing Jacoby Brissett. They've been still trying to recover from this early retirement of Andrew Luck and trying to figure out what the best solution is. They thought Wentz would be a good deal here. They gave up first-round picks for him to the Eagles. So there's a bit of disappointment here that he didn't get it going, reuniting with Frank Reich as well as they thought. But part of it, I think, was he had an offensive line. Jonathan Taylor was running really well, but their passing game left a lot to be desired. T.Y. Hilton was a shell of himself, not healthy. Zach Pascal didn't do much. The tight ends were inconsistent. Now Jack Doyle has retired from that situation. T.Y. Hilton's a free agent. Michael Pittman Jr. had some games, but he was rather up and down as their de facto number one receiver. So I don't think his passing game was all that impressive or helpful to Wentz overall. And really was dink and dunk and very boomer bust here with his production here in 2022. So he was a QB1 for a lot of the years, surprising in fantasy football, because, again, he played off Jonathan Taylor. They get a lot of big touchdown games, a lot of yards there from Wentz. So they're not totally just thinking Wentz is a total disaster, but he's more of a caretaker quarterback right now, playing off Jonathan Taylor's leading rushing and maybe get some play action touchdowns out of that. But he's not going to be a guy that's going to throw for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns and carry this team when it needs someone and people have bottled up Taylor. So when you look at that, I think Carson Wentz still on the table to be being replaced. The problem is the Colts don't have a first-round pick. They just saw Russell Wilson leave, and Aaron Rodgers is not going anywhere. Do they go after Jimmy Garoppolo? Is he really feeling like an upgrade for them over Carson Wentz? Same thing with the Mitchell Trubisky. Do they go at a lower level and figure out if Jordan Love has something here and can transition now that Rodgers is returning to Green Bay? So all kinds of question marks with the Colts and Carson Wentz. But Michael Pittman Jr. is back in the fold. They lost Jack Doyle, so I think they're going to look for a tight end to get some help here. 12 personnel and 2 tight ends with Mo Alley Cox are pretty important to Frank Reich. So I think that's going to be a priority here for the Colts, that kind of rebuild that receiving core a little bit to give Pittman some help. I think they'll keep Zach Pascal to kind of be their possession or slot guy, but I think they need a younger field stretcher. T.Y. Hilton slowing down a little bit. He did show some flashes last year with Wentz, but they need to get somebody who can take advantage of Wentz's big arm here, and I think that's a big concern here with Indianapolis. They want to get a little bit more balanced and explosive here to play off that Taylor running game, and they didn't have that element here. There was a lot of dinking and dunking with Carson Wentz and not letting him loose. And part of it is, again, Pittman is more of a tough inside, big slot type receiver on the outside, but he's not necessarily a field stretcher. I think they got to get that type of player. Maybe they could use 2. One guy in the slot that's pretty quick and dynamic and make things after the catch. One guy can stretch the field occasionally. Maybe a Marquez Valdes-Scantling would be good in that regard, and maybe get a rookie who can really dominate in the slot. So all kinds of things to help Wentz and whoever's at quarterback here in Indianapolis in 2022. The Jaguars do not have a quarterback problem. They do have a concern, though, that Trevor Lawrence had a pretty rough first season there in the Urban Meyer offense there. But Darrell Bevell, Urban Meyer gone. Here comes Doug Peterson, and Doug Peterson is one special coach. We know that. So speaking of Carson Wentz, his former coach has resurfaced here in Jacksonville. What I like about Doug Peterson, and I think he got a bit of a raw deal at the end of Philadelphia, is that he's a guy that is pretty well organized, knows what he wants to do offensively. He has those West Coast principles. He's tied into Eric Bieniemy and Matt Nagy, and of course the Andy Reid tree, where he's once the offensive coordinator of Kansas City. He learned well. He can win a Super Bowl, as we saw with the Eagles. So the Jaguars should be a lot more excited about this. The Urban Meyer experiment failed miserably, but now they have someone who at least knows what he's doing, barring from other offenses here. So this is going to help Trevor Lawrence a lot. It should help Travis Etienne also coming back from that injury at running back. You also have James Robinson dealing with the big injury. So we'll see. They'll probably use Robinson and Etienne a little bit better here. I think they'll go out and get some tight end help. We know that Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert were a big part of what Doug Peterson got done in Philadelphia. So they're not going to go forward with James O'Shaughnessy as their only guy of St. Patrick's Day, but it's a month maybe to think about replacing O'Shaughnessy with a more impact receiver. There's a lot of those in the draft that you can look at for sure, starting with one guy I really like, Trey McBride out of Colorado State. They have Greg Dulcich. He's a move tight end from UCLA. Got Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina. Jalen Weidermeyer from Texas A&M. So a lot of options here for the Jaguars to upgrade their passing game, as well as the Colts with the tight end option here. Now, I think they'll bring DJ Chark back on a deal. He had that bad ankle injury against the Bengals that wiped out his season. I think Chark and Lawrence were having a pretty good connection here. They needed somebody. Laviska Shenault didn't do as much as they wanted here as receiver. Marvin Jones is probably faded out of this offense as well. So what do they do? I think DJ Chark is the most valuable piece to bring back. I really like Chark when healthy, and I think he can be a number one for Lawrence. I think they missed the glue guy at Keelan Cole last year. That was a bit of a tough loss. And again, the end of the season with Laquan Treadwell is their best option. That's not going to sit with anything. So get Chark, maybe upgrade at wide receiver more than that. Don't rely on the older Jones here. And Shenault is a speed quickness guy, but I think he needs to play in the slot and play off those other guys here. So when you look at the Jaguars, how do they arrange these weapons for Trevor Lawrence? They at least gave the franchise tag to Cam Robinson, their left tackle. So that's going to shore up maybe the blocking here. They could get a little bit better in the interior in front. I think defense is going to be the theme of their draft here to rebuild here early. They got the number one overall pick, probably going to take Aiden Hutchinson there of Michigan to get the edge rush going here from Mike Caldwell. He's a former defensive assistant for Todd Bowles. So they need to get that pass rush, the edge going here. And Hutchinson would seem like a bookend. But yeah, they've got some pieces between Etienne and Robinson, returning Chark. If they have Robinson in the mix here at left tackle, then they're really in good shape. So they have some good building blocks, better than others, to help a rookie quarterback going into year two. And Lawrence needs a lot of help. We know he only had 2 multiple touchdown games. He led the league tied with Matthew Stafford, of all people, for interceptions as a rookie. So that has to improve here in 2022 for the Jags. Again, they need to do everything they can to get Lawrence right, because clearly Meyer and Bevel ruined him a little bit. Doug Peterson can't be the Lawrence whisperer, so to speak. So I think having Etienne, having that outlet back here that does a little bit of Alvin Kamara playing off Robinson, that's going to help Robinson stay healthy where they don't have to overburden him with the workload. So you got an immediate weapon there. And again, when you look at the table, if you get Chark back, you have Etienne. Chanel can be a little bit better. Maybe Treadwell can do a little bit more. They add another receiver. It's not looking too bad overall for the Jaguars. And we know what that Doug Peterson was able to do year two with a big athletic talent there in Carson Wentz. Wentz was an MVP candidate. Let's not forget that in year two with the Eagles when they were able to win the Super Bowl there. So I know he got hurt at the end of that, but again, that gives you some upside here for Trevor Lawrence being with Peterson, who at least knows what he's going to do and have a plan here in the NFL, unlike Urban Meyer. All right, we will get into our final segment and look at the Tennessee Titans here for you. But I got to tell you, check out all the great shows here on the network. We're talking about teams here, Texans, Colts, Jaguars. Well, whoever your favorite team in the NFL, maybe it's one of the teams from this division, the AFC South, we've got you covered with the Locked On show. Just look at Locked On, put the team name, and find your analysis here all throughout the offseason. We're going to bring you advanced scouting and looking at free agency and the draft. That's what they do on those shows as well. So check them out. Locked On Texans, Locked On Colts, Locked On Jaguars, Locked On Titans. They're all available for you here, as well as all our team-by-team podcasts that you can check out all season long for whatever team you're a fan of, and every day for most of the offseason. All right, let's close the show looking at the Tennessee Titans. And the Titans, we're not sure how they're feeling about Ryan Tannehill. Let's start with that question mark. Are they totally sold on Ryan Tannehill being their starting quarterback here going forward? I mean, there was this report that Aaron Rodgers had lined up a deal. He moved or at least built a house in Nashville, that they were on the short list. The Broncos were not a surprise. The Steelers were not a surprise, but the Titans were on that list too. And you wonder, what is he thinking here? So I don't know if they're completely sold on Ryan Tannehill. It's hard to be that way when Tannehill had an atrocious playoff game, and they were the number one seed, folks. And they lost to the Bengals, and the Bengals went on to win get to the Super Bowl, not win it, but win the AFC here. So when you look at it, Ryan Tannehill did not play well in that game. He was the liability here. Do they feel like they're not tapping into A.J. Brown and the weaponry they have there? I think they could upgrade their weapons. Their tight ends have kind of fallen off without Jonnu Smith here. So that's a concern. Delaney Walker, they used to have some strength at tight end. It's been a weakness here with Andy Ferkser and Jeff Swaim and those type of players. Wide receiver, I think they could get A.J. Brown some help. They invested a lot to get Julio Jones, a second-round pick. He couldn't stay healthy. Surprise, surprise. All that soft tissue injury, the wear and tear, his age just didn't pan out here for him in Tennessee. I still think he can be a factor, but I think they need a legitimate number two there to help. There's not any of these guys that they shuttle through, including Josh Reynolds. It's not going to work. You got to have three dangerous weapons. We know that. To really have a dynamic passing game, you're going to have three dangerous weapons to have the consistency you're looking for. You saw the Bengals have it for sure. The Rams had it for sure. You've got to have that to really be a factor. So A.J. Brown, we figure, is going to get some help at wide receiver and tight end this year, and that could help them feel a little bit better about Tannehill. They're getting a little bit older on the offensive line, need to replace their center, Ben Jones, Taylor Lewan getting up there. So they did find some help in David Questenberry and some players there that have helped the front, but needs some upgrades there. Derrick Henry coming off the injury, didn't look all that great in the playoffs. That was the reason they also lost. He wasn't quite ready to return. So what do we get from this entire team with the Titans in terms of the running game? Derrick Henry, is he done? Is the workload going to catch up to him finally here in 2022? Are they going to ease the workload a little bit, given how Donta Foreman and Dontrell Hilliard did in this place? Maybe Darrington Evans will get one more shot here to be in the Titans mix in the backfield. So, yeah, more questions than you think with the Titans. I think A.J. Brown is the least of those questions. If he stays healthy, he's going to be a top-flight wide receiver. We saw it. He missed some time last year, but he's still a man, but he needs some help. So I think the Titans are going to prioritize getting a little bit more offensive line help, getting some wide receiver help, look and tap into that tight end depth that I talked about. The Colts and Jaguars also have to consider in this draft. So, Titans pretty much, how much do they trust Ryan Tannehill? What can they do to improve him? And how much Derrick Henry can be a factor playing off him this season? And I think Tannehill's pretty much overplayed his ability here, just playing off the running game in a good situation. But independently, he's got to get it done a little bit more to trust him as a QB1 here in fantasy football. So recapping, it's hard to find any QB1 value for sure in this division. Maybe the Colts will change that if they pick up someone. Carson Wentz was barely there until he faded late in the season. Trevor Lawrence, the arrow points up for him. I think Tannehill points down. Davis Mills kind of stay steady holding pattern until we know exactly what Houston's going to do at quarterback. So Houston, Indianapolis, the biggest quarterback questions. Jaguars have the least, and the Titans have a little bit of one here in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out here. And we'll be watching it all offseason long on Locked On Fantasy Football. We finished up the AFC South. That means we're going to tackle the AFC North tomorrow. So big questions all around with those four teams, the Ravens, and looking at the Bengals still coming off Super Bowl high here, getting there as the AFC champions. They got some questions here for Joe Burrow going into the season. We know which is the biggest one of those, Baker Mayfield, and then you close with the Pittsburgh Steelers with that quarterback void. So that should be a good division to talk about there on the next show, barring another big story happening here, such as Russell Wilson getting traded. But if we're in there, we're going to have a reaction. Don't worry, we're going to focus all next week pretty much on looking at free agency fallout. So we might have a little bit of a later show on Monday to wait for the reaction there of the first wave of signings of offensive skill players. We know there's going to be a lot once that legal tampering period is open for business on noon on Monday following a selection Sunday. Then things are going to get wild and crazy in the NFL. And it's going to have its own type of madness called the free agency frenzy. So we're looking forward to talking to you about that next week. Two more divisions here, AFC North and AFC East. We've gone west to east in both conferences. So two more divisions and 8 more teams to look at in terms of biggest offseason questions, laying out the outlooks. But that's what we do here in Locked On Fantasy Football. If you haven't joined us in the offseason, we're still bringing shows. We're still bringing analysis all the way through the draft. And then we take a little bit of a break, reset, and then start looking at the rankings and the player values and all that. Pure fantasy football more. But during the offseason, we're going to do a hybrid, and that's what I kind of do at sportingnews.com, hybrid with fantasy and reality with draft and free agency. Remember, it's the building blocks that lead up to whether these teams are going to be special. We know Jamar Chase and all that. Got to pay attention to what's happening in March and April to know what's going to transpire in August and to have success September, October, November, December, into January here in fantasy football. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. Thanks for making us first listen every day. Again, look at our AFC North tomorrow. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Speaking of the draft, Ryan Tracy and former NFL quarterback Eric Crocker bring you the NFL Draft and bring it to life every day with inside analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's a free and available, just like this show, wherever you get your podcasts. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day and check you out tomorrow.